We don't have a lot of text today. I wanted to bring out an interesting point. I've been looking around in some of the Meforshim. I haven't been able to find anyone who really hones in on this point, so maybe it's not real, but I wanted to raise it with you and see what you think about it. When Korach raises his objections to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he says, everyone's holy, and why are you lording over the Jewish people? We take a look at Moshe Rabbeinu's response, beginning with Pasuk Ches in chapter 16. Vayomer Moshe el Korach Shimuna b'nei Levi. So Moshe says, Korach, listen up, sons of Levi. Hama'at mikem ki hivdil Elokei Yisrael eschem me'adas Yisrael lahakriv eschem elav. Is it such a small thing that God has already separated you from the rest of the congregation to bring you close to Him? La'avodas avodas Mishkan Hashem, to do the service of the Mishkan of God. V'la'amod lifnei ha'idol l'shorasam, and to stand in front of the congregation to serve them. Don't you think you have enough power already? That's not enough for you? That you're of a special elite class among the Jewish people? And this does not, this does not mollify Korach. He continues with his rebellion. Now, if we look at one of the punishments, last year we talked about the punishment of the Maktirei Ketoris, of those who offered the incense. There were 250 distinguished men who joined Korach's insurrection. And Moshe instructed those 250 men, I want you to go and take censer pans, take these pans of incense, stand in front of the Mishkan, and if Hashem really does desire your service, that you be the leaders of the people and not the people that are accompanying me, so then God will accept your incense offering. And of course we know what happened. The fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. In the very same way that Nadav and Avihu were consumed when they tried to offer Ketoris in the Holy of Holies. And last year when we were discussing this very story of the Maktirei HaKetoris, we explained that this is the appropriate response to someone who tries to come too close when it's not mandated by Hashem. Just like a moth gets burned by the fire when it flies too close, those who seek to have this inner role of intimacy with God, when it's not sanctioned by Hashem, that's the fate that they have to suffer. And so these people, even though they were l'shem shamayim, they really wanted to have this special position within the Jewish people, and they might have even been worthy of it, but they were not chosen. And Hashem says, therefore, your service is illegitimate. But then the next part of the story is after these Maktirei Ketoris are burned alive, then we get to the story of the more famous part of the story, where Korach and his families and the families of Dasan and Aviram are standing by their tents with their wives and their children. And the pasuk says, starting with pasuk Chaf Gimel, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Daber el ha'eda Lemor, Hey alu misaviv lemishkan Korach Dasan ba'aviram. That God says to all of the other people, move away from the place of Korach, Dasan, and Aviram, from the place where they are dwelling. Now, before I go any further in the Psukim, I just want to ask you to focus or think about one thing, and that is that when we talked about the Maktirei HaKetoris, it's very easy to understand. You're trying to serve God in an illegitimate way. So the way that you're punished is through that illegitimate service. That makes very good sense. It's midah keneged midah. It's measure for measure punishment. But now we see the other group of Korach's rebels are being punished in a totally different way. They're being punished by standing at their tents with their families, and then the earth opening up and swallowing them up. How is that punishment commensurate to their rebellion, commensurate to their crime? And that's what I want to focus on. Not so much the earth swallowing them up, because we all know that the idea of the earth swallowing them up and completely making them disappear is because people who try to make a name for themselves, God's measure for measure punishment for them is to erase their name. So it's almost like Hashem says, you try to create permanence, so I'm going to swallow you up, then no one will ever remember you, right? There's no remnant of you at all in this world left. That was the message. But what what I'd like to focus on is why is it that they're at their tents when this is going on? And also take a look at the word Mishkan as it is used here, because the word Mishkan is normally used throughout the Torah to refer to the holy tabernacle, and the word Mishkan in the story of Korach is used in a totally different way. So Hashem says, hey, Moshe says, or Hashem says, speak to the congregation, saying, hey, alu misaviv lemishkan Korach dasan va'aviram. Elevate yourselves all around. In other words, get away from the dwelling place of Korach, Dasan, and Va'aviram. Vayaka Moshe vayilech el Dasan va'aviram vayilechu acharav b'ziknei Yisrael. So Moshe gets up. He goes to where Dasan and Aviram are, and everyone, all the elders follow him. Vayidaber ha'idol. So he speaks. Obviously, everyone's, this huge confrontation at the tents of Dasan and Aviram. And he says to the rest of the people, he says, Suru na me'al ohaleha anashim harishayim ha'ela. Move away from the tents of these evil people. Ve'al tiga'u b'chol asher lahem. Do not touch anything that belongs to them. Pen tisafu b'chol chatosam. Lest you be destroyed through their sins. And therefore the Torah says, Vaye alu me'al mishkan Korach dasan va'aviram misaviv. Once again, you have that term mishkan Korach. The pasuk could have just as easily said ohel Korach, because after all, that's what Moshe was really saying. Move away from the tents of these people. Why is the word mishkan over here used? So they all move away from the mishkan of Korach dasan va'aviram all around. V'dasan va'aviram yatzu nitzavim pesach ohalehem unashehem uvenehem v'tapam. And Dasan and Aviram walk outside defiantly at the entrance of their tents with their wives and their children and all of their youngsters. Okay, so again, the focus for me is the word Mishkan is used. There is no other place in the Torah, no other place, you can look it up in your CD search. There is no other place in the Torah where the word Mishkan is used, not referring to the tabernacle that we call the Mishkan. This is the only place in all of Chumash where the word Mishkan is used in a completely different context. So that should give us a clue that there's some kind of subtext here, there's some kind of encoding that we're supposed to try and figure out. What is going on? Another thing that is very interesting is that there are only two places in the Torah where the Mishkan is called the Mishkan Hashem, the Mishkan of God. One is in the story of Korach, where Moshe Rabbeinu says that God has brought you close, O Levites, to serve to work in the Mishkan of Hashem. The only other place where we find the Mishkan called the Mishkan of Hashem, the Mishkan of God, is in Sefer Vayikra, where it talks in Parshas Acharei Mos, where the Torah is talking about when you want to eat meat in the desert, when you're hungry for a steak in the desert. So the Torah has a rule that, if you want a steak today, you don't have to go to the Beis HaMikdash and bring it as a korban. If we had to do that, we'd be in trouble, right? Because then we'd never be able to eat meat. If we always had to bring a korban before we could partake of meat. But when the Jewish people were living in the desert, the rule was, if you want to eat meat, you have to eat only sacrificial meat. You're in a very, very holy state right now. And therefore, anytime you want to indulge physically, you have to sanctify the animal first by bringing a portion of it as a korban. And therefore, the Torah tells us in the psukim over there in Parshas Acharei Mos that it's in Perek Yud Zayin. The halacha is, speak to Aaron and his sons and all of the Jewish people and say to them, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem limor. This is what Hashem has commanded. Ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shor o chesav o ez b'machaneh. Any person who shall slaughter an ox or a cow or a sheep or a goat in the camp, o asher yishchat michutz lamachaneh, or even if he wants to slaughter it outside the camp, ve'el pesach ol moed lo hevi o lahakriv korban l'Hashem lifnei mishkan Hashem, and he doesn't want to bring it before the tent of meeting, before the Mishkan. And notice here it says Mishkan Hashem. This is the only other place in all of Chumash where it's called Mishkan Hashem. Otherwise, it's just normally called Lifnei HaMishkan. So what's the law? Dam yechashev la'ishahu dam shafach. Then that person has spilled blood. That person has spilled illicit blood. He's committed an act that's tantamount to murder by taking a life that is not his to take. You have no right to kill an animal unless you're bringing it as a korban, because of your holy status. And the reason is because Laman asher yaviu b'nei Yisrael zivchayim asher heim zochim al pnei hasadeh v'heviyum l'Hashem. But I want you to bring all of your sacrifices to God. You have to train yourselves to serve only Hashem and not to serve any other deity or any other being. And many of the midrashim point to the fact that, especially at the incipient stages of the Jewish people's development, where there's still this very deep-grained desire for idolatry, Hashem wants to make sure that no one's slaughtering a goat to the gods. So therefore, when you want to slaughter a goat, make sure you bring it to the Mishkan so that you're focused exclusively on Hashem. So that's the reason for this law when the Jewish people are in the desert. But what's the connection? So I think the connection is this. And we do this all the time in life, and that's where we have to make sure that we're not getting caught up as being a Korach. What is a Mishkan? A Mishkan is a dwelling place. It's where I create my center. It's my Makom HaShechina, the place of ultimate dwelling. You know, a man's home is his palace, right? That's like saying a man's home is his Mishkan. And the mistake that Korach made is that he drew the bullseye before he drew the rest of the target. And that's why it's always easy to have a bullseye, because when you draw the bullseye, before you draw the circles around it, you'll get a bullseye every time. Korach really sincerely believed that he was where it was at. And the rest of the world needed to come to him because I'm the center of the universe. And that's what his mistake was. That was really I have certain preconceived notions of the way things should be. My thoughts are the way life should be. And it's just a matter of convincing everyone else. The rest of the world is crazy. I'm the only sane one. Sometimes that attitude is appropriate when you really do have a very strong conviction. But sometimes you need to get a reality check from other people as well to make sure that you're not crazy. And Korach never really got the reality check. He never really gave enough credence to Moshe Rabbeinu and to all of the other elders that were in the community that perhaps he was mistaken and they were right. And as a result, his home was his castle. His Dalet Amos, the place where he dwelled, that was the place, the ultimate place of dwelling. And if you want to be part of my world, you got to come to me. And that was the whole theme of this whole story, where Moshe Rabbeinu has to come to their tents in order to exact punishment from them. Because what you've done is you've created this sense of centrality to yourself, to your ideas, to your family, that I'm the end-all, the be-all and end-all. And my family is the be-all and end-all of everything. We are the most important. We reign supreme. And my ideology reigns supreme, and therefore everyone else is ancillary and subservient to our way of life. And that's why his tent is called his Mishkan, because instead of making God's tent the Mishkan, he made his tent the Mishkan. That's the mistake. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu says, when he is talking to Korach and telling him that you're making a terrible mistake, God has chosen you to serve the Mishkan of Hashem, not the Mishkan of Korach. And that's why the emphasis is placed on Mishkan Hashem. It's the very same emphasis that's made in the Sefer Vayikra when we talk about making sure that you bring animals to the Mishkan of Hashem. It's because it's in contradistinction to making anything else in life your Mishkan. My dwelling place, my Mishkan, my attitudes, my ideologies in life have to be adjusted to conform to God's attitudes, not the other way around. If we find a dissonance between our attitudes and the Torah's attitudes, then it's not that we have to readjust the Torah's attitudes and realign them until they make sense to our way of thinking, but just the opposite. We have to realign our way of thinking, or society's way of thinking, in order to make them more subservient and more in conformance with the Torah's way. And that's really what's conveyed in the word Mishkan, I think, as the dwelling place. It's Hashem's dwelling place. It's not, I'm not the dwelling place, it's Hashem's dwelling place. So it's hard to know when we're crossing that line, that Korach line, and bringing God to us instead of bringing ourselves to Hashem. But anytime I reinterpret my Yiddishkeit to make it more convenient to, or more expedient to my own lifestyle, then I'm crossing the Korach line. We have to be very, very careful not to reinterpret the mitzvahs or not to reinterpret Yiddishkeit so that they conform with what we're comfortable with, but rather we have to be able to move our comfort level to make them in consonance with the Torah. That's the idea that I wanted to convey.